shout out to Dogwood Maple in the tailgate. He's been pulling into his spot. He's been giving me some laughs, including the key to not having an abdominal muscle strain is you don't have any ab muscles.
That's why I've never had any.
Go. You don't have to worry about it. All right. On Mondays, we like to take a look at the new updated top 25 rankings in Poll Second. And it is Jeff Banks's Texas Longhorns that are number one in the AP Top 25 poll. They got 35 first place votes. Georgia got 23. And then you've got 5 first place votes that are still with the Ohio State Buckeyes. Georgia remains their position at number one in the coaches poll. And then at the CBS Sports 134 released on Monday, Texas also moved into number one. If you're curious, the average rating across the ballots of CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports experts, with Texas average ranking 1.7, Georgia average ranking 2.4, which means that at the CBS Sports 134, not everybody thinks Texas is number one. And there are some that believe that Georgia is not even number two. Of course, that would be Ohio State is in this conversation as well. Danny,
way to go. Well done.
Okay.
Because I've seen too many times when the AP goes with the older mindset of if you win, you hold serve, and if you lose, you get dinged, and you have to go down a certain length for actually making a move like this, which is significant, right? You're changing your mind on who is the best. I think you should also be willing to, if Georgia goes to Bama and beats them, be like, yep, boom, right back up. And if Texas looks vulnerable without Quinn Ewers, if he's potentially out, then you ding them down. If they struggle. I like the fluidity of the AP voters thinking. Like, I think this is the way it should be, where you're less rigid and you're more willing to look and see what you had. I did see some Ohio State fans, because I put out my poll and I had Texas at number one, and Ohio State fans were like, well, what about us? We've looked great and Georgia looked awful. You can't just disregard what Georgia did at Clemson. Like, there still is a resume there, but when you stack them up, how have they looked together this season? They both have a really nice win, and then one has dominated every other opponent, one has not. And it was a struggle against Kentucky, which I think is, and I also think Kirby Smart's probably secretly loving this, because it allows him to go in his team and say, look, they don't believe in you. They think you suck. And now they'll come out with, the hair on fire. So, but I appreciate the voters being willing to make that change.
It is funny how many people just kind of forgot about that whole 34-3 win over Clemson. Because I got a lot of those arguments too. It's like, Georgia hasn't beaten any. I had tweets, Georgia hasn't beaten anybody. It's like, they beat Clemson by 31 to start the season. I know they struggled against Kentucky, and I'll have more on that later upon further review. But I don't disagree with putting Texas number one if you want to. That's perfectly reasonable, because Texas, I think, when beating Michigan on the road, is probably a better win than the win over Clemson at a neutral site, although time may show that the Clemson win was much more impressive. We'll see. But I am somewhat pleased to see the more of a open-minded ranking, although our colleague Adam Zucker has him at 6. I don't know if I would go that low on Georgia, but I at least get the argument for it. But yeah, I do think the AP poll is becoming a lot more reactionary than it has been in recent years.
Probably a good thing.
Yeah. I mean, it's
in a lot of cases. In some cases,
I love how the chat hates this segment, but yet they all watch it. And like on YouTube, it hits every week. So maybe they hate watch. We appreciate it.
So the other piece of this that is really interesting to me is, what is it going to take for the following teams to really enter the conversation? Alabama, Ole Miss, Tennessee, and maybe even Miami too. Because these teams are going to, like, Alabama plays Georgia. I get that. Tennessee's got a couple weeks. They've got Oklahoma. Then they've got a couple weeks before they play Alabama. Is there anything that an Ole Miss or a Miami can do? Can they collect enough momentum from a rankings perspective as they continue to stack up wins? Because I enjoy that we have a real conversation for number one, but I also think we've got a group there in the back half of the top 10, especially with some of the schedules that they face, where they could be sitting there at like 8-0, Danny being like, well, why? Like, they'll be in the Ohio State position. Like, why not us? And it'll be something interesting to track.
Tennessee, and Chuck pointed this out in the chat. If they go to Norman, and I don't even think they have to like whoop them, but if they win, I think they have a chance to enter this conversation and leapfrog a couple teams.
I don't think Ole Miss has a chance at all.
Yeah.
Miami and A&M are getting a lot of helium based on smoking a UF team that really looks like they have kind of quit. So I don't think that they have an additional opportunity to get more helium in the polls until they really play somebody decent. Kind of the same thing for Ole Miss and Missouri. I think if Van Dyke had stayed in for for Wisconsin, then Alabama's win over Wisconsin might be getting a little more respect. I was pretty impressed with Alabama's defensive line overall. Secondary, which was our concern about that team, I think, or at least mine, was not really tested by the backup quarterback. So I think we still have an unknown there. But if Van Dyke had stayed in for Wisconsin, I do think Bama probably gets a little more love.
Tennessee currently with the #1 scoring offense in the country, the #3 scoring defense for the country. The cumulative scores of Tennessee's 3 wins is 191-13. Just smashing everybody.
And again, that's another jump that they made, Tennessee over Mizzou. Mizzou was a little bit less than impressive against Boston College, didn't cover the spread, still won. So, like, who cares about it? But Tennessee, I would say their resume is better and they've looked better in blowouts and they feel more complete. So I like that another move the AP made, being willing to, even though both teams won, you bump one a little bit more than the other. I mean, it sounds to me that the AP voters, probably like Tom Fornelli, are able to be purchased with swag. And so maybe that's why they made the jump. I want some of that swag. I've been high on the Nico train. Come on.
First of all, I'm not an AP voter. Ralph Russo.
Yeah, but you're more influential on here.
Yeah, Ralph would never give votes to
Ralph
us.
would never give it to me.
He knows us too well. That's the problem.
That's right.
He doesn't want those angry texts. Like, what the hell are we doing, Ralph? No, I mean, honestly, I don't have many problems with anything at the top of the poll this week. Like, because I mean, there was a week where the two teams that lost, the only 2 ranked teams that lost a ranked team. So it was a pretty cookie cutter kind of week. And it was, maybe that's what led to so much movement at the top, because sometimes people just feel like they need to move things around. They don't want to send in the same ballot. And that leads to Texas moving up to #1. My bigger problem is at the bottom.
I told you Illinois would get in. You were like,
Yeah, but
it's just Central Michigan. I was like, nah. Illinois
They're in-
got that momentum.
They're in over a couple teams that I believe should be ranked ahead of them.
Like Indiana?
Yes. I think that if you're looking at the Big Ten right now, they've got Nebraska at 22, Illinois at 24. Nebraska has the win over Colorado, which I guess holds some cachet in the minds of voters because they have beaten North Dakota State and Colorado State. But Indiana, to me, deserves it far more than Illinois does to this point. Because if you look at Indiana's overall schedule, they haven't played anybody, but they have absolutely smoked every single team on their schedule. They have dominated them from the first snap of the game until the end. Whereas Illinois has the win over Eastern Illinois, which whatever. Central Michigan, they crushed them. And they beat Kansas, which was a huge win for them last week. But Kansas then follows it up with a loss to UNLV. So how good is Kansas? So you mentioned, like, Danny, people just kind of, if you win, you move up. If you lose, you go down. Illinois being ranked for beating Central Michigan while Indiana is still outside the poll is very much a Illinois. Well, we had them on our ballots last week, so we'll just bump them up and put them in. I don't think they should be there.
Indiana's not even receiving votes.
They receive votes.
Are you sure? You guys?
Yeah,
Oh, I
they
see it.
got
I see it.
13.
I see it. They got 13. I see it. But they're like not 26, 27. They're close to 30, right?
They
Yeah.
showed up on 1, 2, 5 ballots, none higher than 22. Because
it feels like again, we 15 through 40 is, and maybe not 15, but maybe the cutoff is like after Louisville, like 20 to 40 at this point seems very interchangeable. If you
It's trendy. It's like a stock report. It's like who's hot. You know, you can cycle yourself on it. I mean, from a let me put my Bud pants on real quick. Like, Northern Illinois is not the 23rd best team in the country.
No, but they have an impressive win.
Right.
Right. I mean, you could like if you said LSU should be somewhere between 25 and 40, I really can't get with that. Notre Dame kind of the same overall, most likely, and Michigan too, and Louisville obviously has crushed everybody. But if you wanted to say like Iowa State, Clemson, Nebraska, Northern Illinois, Illinois, A&M belong somewhere between like 20 and 40, no problem with that at all. Yeah,
You could throw Cal in there. Cal beat Auburn at Auburn. I mean, that's like a better beating Auburn at Auburn and being 3-0 is a more impressive win than smashing App State at home.
We are headed for an awesome final 10 weeks of the college football season, in large part because we have just not had the upsets that maybe we normally have in some seasons. We had this last year too, a little bit, but I mean, Nebraska's still 3-0. Illinois, hell, Pitt's undefeated, right? Memphis is still undefeated. Cuse is still undefeated. And Boise had the close game there. UNLV is still undefeated, right? BC had a reasonable game against Missouri on the road. Wazoo's still undefeated. We're going to have a whole lot of matchups coming up where both teams have a 0 in the loss column.
Yep.
And true to form with the AP poll, there has been one major upset, but the team that lost is still ranked ahead of the team that beat it.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got, by the way, speaking of those Kansas Jayhawks, the pillar of Illinois' rankings profile, down 36 spots in the CBS Sports 134, now checking in at number 56. That is the land, not of the middle of the pack power conference teams. That is the land of the middle of the pack of the whole daggum FBS. So Jayhawks got a lot to figure out. Maybe we'll be taking a deeper dive on that moving forward, but
feels like a lot, right? I mean, they had a 90% post-game win expectancy against UNLV. And UNLV did kind of luck box their way to that win a bit with recovering some of those fumbles they had. And they weren't blown out by Illinois. I mean, that was a competitive game on the road against what maybe the rest of the country doesn't realize yet, but it certainly appears to be a much improved Illinois team. If you lost to last year's Illinois team, okay, that's a little different, but this team looks better. So 56 feels
drastic.
I don't know. That's a bit drastic. Yeah.
it can happen fast out there in the land between 30 and 60.
No doubt.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you think UNLV though should be they have the best resume of the group of 5. They smoked Houston.
Oh, it was Houston. They got two.
They beat them like convincingly.
Only 2-0 team in the Big 12.
Yeah. Okay.
And Memphis's resume, like, hey, good for them. They might, but like, do you see the teams they've beaten? They're all 0-3.
Is playing Oregon to a score in Oregon more impressive to you than beating Kansas and beating Houston? Because to me, it is.
Yeah.
Like, it's a more impressive performance. Obviously, it's not a win, but
yeah.
I don't know.
Coming up on the other side, we got to open up the market. Checking in with Day Train Danny. We got to give you an update. Some of the best individual performances from the weekend that mattered the most to us by the Cover 3 Fantasy League and the Drive to 325. Iowa has a monster game against Minnesota. How many points do they need to score to stay on pace for the Drive to 325? We'll get into all that plus upon further review next.